Again, good evening, and at this time, I'd like to call to order the November 10th, 2021 meeting of the Newberg Planning Commission and start things off with a roll call, if we could, please. See who's here.
Okay, so Charles Aben is excused. Sharon Capri.
Here.
Jason Dale.
Here.
Gina Morris. I don't think it's there. Jeffrey Musall.
Here.
Chris Wright.
Here.
Aidan Gray.
Here.
Okay, that's all the commissioners. Thank you.
Okay, and I thank you. So let's see, we've got a few things to do this evening. So started off with, is there anyone that'd like to make a public comment for any items not on the agenda? It'll be limited to 5 minutes. And if there's anything you'd like to bring up that's not on the agenda tonight, this is the time to do it. If so, just raise your hand and let us know.
Mr. Chair, we do have one individual who had some general comments he would like to share with the commission. That is Mr. Talt.
Okay, go ahead.
Howdy, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you see me?
That's a no.
Yeah, I don't know why that is. I've had this problem before, but you know, it's what I have to say. It's important. Thank you for
Okay.
tonight. I have 3 bullet points to discuss in the general public comment, and then 2 later when we get to the -377 resolution. And I apologize if sometimes I may sound a little brusque. It's not meant to be impolite. I just want to be succinct. So I'll read my comments to you as bullet points, and then I'll mail them to you tomorrow. First would be, please record my bullet point topics in the written minutes for this meeting. I'd like them to be on record, and I'd like them to be easy to find. My next bullet point is, please add some public speaking registration instructions with a link to the form and also a phone number alternative for computer challenge folks. The agenda says to fill out a registration form, but I didn't find a link to any form, and I couldn't be sure how to sign up to speak tonight, so I went through our city clerk, Sue, and she helped me out. Anyway, adding that registration link instruction will remove an obstacle to public participation, and I'd appreciate that. The next bullet point item, please, I'm sorry I don't have the camera for this. Please add some plain speaking summaries of planning and building proposals to those legalese type announcements like the one we got in our water bill this month. It's an incomprehensible list of codes, resolutions, and a microscopic multicolored map. And it's difficult for many people to understand, particularly computer challenge folks. So even though I know it'd be some extra work, I would appreciate very much if you could find a way to in addition to the legalized form that I know that you got to put all that information out there to satisfy the, you know, Oregon state and everybody else. If you could add some plain speak summary, because that also would remove an obstacle that limits public participation in government. Anyway, thank you. Those are my comments, and I would, like I said, I'll email those to you tomorrow. And if you could put those bullet points into the minutes, I would appreciate it. And I'll wait until my next opportunity when we get to the -377 stuff.
All right, well, thank you. And, you know, that's something we can look into. We'll have to, you know, talk to Mr. Rux and everything just about how much can be put in that's different from the legal description. But I'm sure that's something they can, you know, look into to make it easier for people to access and everything.
Well, you could, if you can still hear me, you could simply add it as an additional sheet to the standard legalized thing, and just make the other sheet for all of us regular folks. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and duly noted. You know, that's something we can look into. Okay, and is there anyone else that would like to make a comment?
Mr. Chairman, I'm seeing no hands.
Okay, well, thank you. So at this point, let's take a look at the consent calendar. And we need to address our commission meeting minutes from the last meeting. So would anyone like to offer resolution on that?
Planning Commissioner Chris Wright moves to approve Planning Commission minutes for 10/14/2021.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve the minutes with a second. If we could just do a voice call. Aye, if you approve.
Aye.
Aye, everyone else? Anyone else?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries. So moving on. First item up is a legislative public hearing. And it's about, concerning a resolution recommending the city council amend the Newberg comprehensive plan, the municipal code, the title development code with quite a few, sub numbers there having to do with the Newberg specific plan, Springbrook Oaks specific plan, and Springbrook master plan relating to middle housing regulations. Yeah, so at this point, I'd like to state that there will be a period for public testimony. Again, it'll be limited to 5 minutes. And that will come after the staff summary when we go into public testimony. And we'll just call out for who wants to speak, and you'd be allowed to at that point. And now I'd like to call for abstentions, conflicts of interest, or any objections to jurisdiction. Hearing none. Doug, are you going to do the reading this evening, or?
Well, Mr. Chair, for a legislative hearing, we do not require the quasi judicial.
Oh, we don't. Okay,
reading.
that's only-
We will get to that in our next case,
In our next-
on your particular agenda. But I will start this off. So this evening we have with us Elizabeth Decker, our sub-consultant for this particular project, and she's with Jet Planning. And so she's going to give you a presentation, but I need to start with entering the entire staff report, all the attachments and the exhibits into the public record. So as you had indicated, there are 43 sections of the development code that need to be amended to comply with House Bill 2001. There is also a comprehensive plan amendment, and then there are 3 specific master plan areas that also require amendments for this particular proposal. I'm going to now turn it over to Elizabeth. She's going to walk you through a PowerPoint presentation on the proposal. You do have all of the findings in your staff report. So we've done those for the Newberg Comprehensive Plan, Development Code requirements, statewide planning goals, the specific plan requirements, and the Oregon administrative rules. And so that's why your packet is relatively large this evening. There's a lot of analysis that needs to go in to complying with this particular provision of House Bill 2001. So Elizabeth, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, well, thank you, Doug, and thank you, members of the commission, for having me here this evening. If I could just request permission to share my screen, I can get this exciting PowerPoint up and running. As Doug mentioned, I am part of the consultant team that has been working with the city of Newberg since last fall to do the HB 2001 Middle Housing Code amendments. And so my partner in that has been 3J Consulting. So they've helped with a lot of the work. And now we are here for the legislative public hearing on these Middle Housing Code and plan amendments. So nearing the finish line and looking forward to discussing with you. The overall objectives for this project were to expand opportunities to develop and remove barriers for middle housing to help address Newberg's housing needs. That also builds on the housing needs analysis the city has done, which identified a need for a variety of housing options. This also helps the city comply with HB 2001, as Doug had mentioned. And there's really 2 parts to that, the way that it was written. The first piece was permitting duplexes on every lot where single-family detached residential is permitted. And so the city has met that obligation because of the city's size, right on the cusp of 25,000 people. That's the dividing line. So the first piece was to comply with duplexes. And then since that adoption in June, the city has crossed over the line of 25,000 people, which now makes it a large city per terms of these regulations, which means that the city also needs to permit triplexes, quadplexes, townhouses, and cottage clusters in residential areas where single family detached homes are permitted. And so that is the bulk of that's what makes up the code amendment package and the plan amendment package and the changes to the specific plans and master plans that are before you tonight. And the city could see which way those numbers were headed, based on population, and began this process comprehensively last fall, looking at both duplexes as well as the full range of middle housing to make sure that the full requirements of HB 2001 were met. So as mentioned, we started in fall of last year. We went through a code audit and developed some code concepts of ways that the city could meet the requirements to permit middle housing, and then turned that into some draft and now final code language that is before you this evening. The duplex code language was adopted and is effective currently today. Duplexes can be built in the city of Newberg. And then the proposed language tonight addresses how triplexes, quadplexes, townhouses, and cottage clusters can be built. And that's a fun tongue twister if you ever want to, practice that one around the house. Since our work began last fall, we have virtually engaged with the public throughout this project to better shape the package of code amendments to meet Newberg. There are some specific parameters in HB 2001 about what has to be permitted and really some guardrails that we need to stay within. But within that limited sandbox, we did want to ensure that we tailored the code recommendations to best fit Newberg's needs. So we worked with a citizen advisory committee throughout. We had 2 open house meetings, as well as there were 2 online surveys that each generated hundreds of responses. And all of the survey responses are included in your packet tonight as one of the exhibits. And probably 2 of the most common themes that we heard was a desire to add more housing options that are more affordable. Just a note that we're talking about more affordable as in less expensive types of housing. These aren't necessarily regulated affordable housing, sort of in that public sense that you might be thinking of when you hear the phrase affordable housing. The idea is just that these housing types can generally be a smaller size and could be less expensive to rent, but they would all be, we would presume to be market rate unless they were developed by an organization such as Habitat for Humanity. So they might be more affordable, but that we're not saying that this is restricted to regulated affordable housing. We did hear throughout some concern about how the community can manage parking impacts and what the scale and the size of these units could be. And so both those are addressed through the code package that we will get into some of these details. Okay, so the first piece, right, as good planners, we want to start with the comprehensive plan. And the housing element of Newberg's comprehensive plan generally supports this direction, but we wanted to make it very clear with a new policy that explicitly permits triplexes, quadplexes, townhouses, and cottage clusters in residential areas to implement this new section, this new division of the Oregon administrative rules. And so we added a policy specific to this. And then the bulk of the work really comes, as Doug had mentioned, in these 43 sections of development code amendments that are in your packet tonight. And so if I were to distill it in a slide, the biggest concepts that we're trying to accomplish through these 43 sections really gets at permitting middle housing more broadly and with fewer obstacles throughout the code and throughout all residential zones in the city. And so that work includes adding definitions for all of these new middle housing types, allowing middle housing in all of these residential zones. And that does include the master plan and specific plan areas. We'll talk a little about what that means. We also need to add some minimum lot sizes that are specific to middle housing. They don't have to be the same as the minimum lot sizes for duplexes. So there is some variation in the regulations about what is the right size and how big or how small cities can regulate. With those lot sizes, we generally maintained the existing dimensional standards, so height and the setbacks. There's a little bit of fine tuning that we can get into. We also added some clear and objective design standards that apply to these different middle housing types to help address that bulk and compatibility issues in neighborhoods that are predominantly single family detached. And then a big piece that is driven, fully by the state regulations is the parking requirements are capped at, the city can require a maximum of 1 parking space per dwelling unit for these new housing types. And so that is how the code is drafted. And we also made some changes to the access and how these parking areas are configured to make it more feasible. Okay. Okay, so first piece here was looking at the housing definitions. As I mentioned, each of these new types has a definition. One thing to note, the triplexes and quadplexes specifically allow for both attached configurations, such as the one you see on the left here, as well as detached options that you see on the right. And so that's sort of a new concept in the housing world, this idea that you could have a detached triplex or quadplex that's 3 or 4 smaller units with some separation on a lot. So that's something that we added just for greater flexibility. The uses, this is really the heart of making sure middle housing is permitted across the city in all these residential zones. So you can see where we have made townhouse dwellings permitted rather than special uses in all these zones, as well as added triplexes, quadplexes, and cottage clusters. For the lot sizes, as I mentioned, the state legislation sets these lot sizes in relationship to single family lot sizes, but they don't have to be the same as single family lot sizes. So the first line in this table is the minimum lot sizes for single family detached dwellings. That's what that acronym is for. Us planners can't get away from acronyms. And duplexes. And so those range from a 5,000 square foot in the R1 down to 2,500 square feet in the R3. I see some hands being raised, and I'm hopefully going to hold all of the comments to the end. Yes, great. Thanks, just catching up on the chat. But we'll get through this and then have some time for comments. And then we're introducing these new minimum lot sizes specifically for triplexes, quadplexes. The townhouse is 1,500 square feet. That'll be permitted across all zones. That comes directly from the state regulations. And we don't have a lot of flexibility in that. And then this 7,000 for quadplexes and cottage clusters also comes from those implementing regulations. When we look at the dimensional standards, the goal here was to largely keep them the same so that the building envelope for these new types would be the same as single family detached, so that the overall bulk of any one of these new middle housing types would be compatible and comparable. The few changes that we did add were to increase the feasibility for townhouses in the R1 zone. We added just a little bit of a boost in building coverage and allowed height there to make it more feasible on those smaller lots. And then we also added a specific height limit for cottages. The goal with cottages is that they are more dense, smaller, detached housing types. And part of that is limiting them to 25 feet or 2 stories, just to keep them compatible in an area. Another piece that we looked at is how many of these new types of housing can be clustered together to make up different projects. So for townhouses, the numbers that we settled on were allowing up to 4 attached townhouses in a row in the R1 zone. But in the other more dense zones, there could be up to 8 units. But we would still expect 4 to be most common across all zones because of the way the building code is written. There's some differences once you get above 4 that could make it more difficult to build, and makes 4 a more popular number, I understand. And then on the cottage cluster side, that's where we're looking at individual detached units. And the direction from the state is this could be as few as 3 but it can go up to, we've allowed 8 together in the R1 zone, or up to 12 units in the more dense residential zones. And that's how many units could be clustered around a shared green space, the courtyard in the middle of them. But you could have multiple clusters if, we're in Newberg, so we think about grapes, right? If you think about multiple bunches of grapes all on the same vine, that's sort of an analogy of how you could have multiple clusters of cottages on the same site, as long as each of them have their own courtyard or, stem, if you will, if we extend the vine analogy. And then the individual cottages themselves, as I mentioned, are smaller in scale than a single family detached home. That's how you can get more of them in a higher density. And the maximum footprint of those will be limited to 900 square feet. And when we look at, what could these units look like? We have introduced in the code some new clear and objective design standards. And that is part of overall Oregon state law for residential uses, that any design standards need to be clear and objective rather than discretionary standards, where it really is up to, in the eye of the beholder, whether the housing looks good or not. In order to make it more feasible to develop and have a level playing field, everything needs to be clear and objective. So that often means, more numeric standards or more highly defined standards. So the way that we accomplished that, the state actually produced a model code. So we largely are implementing the model code for these design standards that's been vetted and thoroughly proofed with experts around the state. So we thought that was the best basis to work from. That meant that we were revising some of the existing townhouse standards. Newberg had some previously. So we're going to revise those, but introduce new standards for the triplexes, quadplexes, and cottage clusters. And within those, we get to address some specific design features, which will look like this. So the first piece is regulating the main entry orientation. So we just had Halloween recently. And so this relates to what I call the trick or treat test, which is the entrance prominent enough from the street that a determined child that really wanted candy would be able to find the main entrance. And so that contrasts with some types of dwellings where the main entrance is, well towards the back, or the garage dominates in front. And, a child, even motivated by candy, would have a hard time finding that door to knock. So these main entrance options in the code are Halloween friendly and have these opportunities to bring the main entrance directly oriented towards the street, or as you see in the example on the right, oriented towards a common courtyard and then connected to the street. Okay, next piece has to do with minimum window coverage, requiring at least 15%. Oh, excuse me, 15% windows on the coverage. Next one is looking at the, pardon the interruption. Next piece has to do with adding some facade defining architectural features. So things like a bay window, a recessed entryway, a covered entrance, a balcony. And so for townhouses, these standards the standards require that each unit in a townhouse that are connected each have to have at least one of these defining architectural features. So it's sort of a menu approach, provides a lot of flexibility, but also some definition. Okay. And then cottages, as I mentioned, are a little bit distinct because it's not only the design of the individual units, but the way that they're arranged on a site and their relationship to each other. And so the most important part of the cottage standards has to do with ensuring there is this common courtyard, as you see in E here, and that it is a single contiguous piece that meets a minimum width, and that the cottages are oriented around it. So moving past design standards, we get into the parking standards that certainly have generated some comments. And of course, we all want to know that there will be places to park. So the general requirement, as I mentioned, comes straight from the state regulations for a minimum of 1 off-street parking space per unit. And then within that, for the triplexes and the quadplexes, we looked at some different options for how that could actually be accommodated on a site. So we've provided options for one or more driveways that similar to duplexes, that there are options to have 2 driveways on corner lots specifically, and then on mid-block lots, it could be possible to add 2 driveways if the site is wide enough to allow for 22-foot spacing between the driveways. And the idea there is that 22 feet is a generous on-street parking space. And so we don't want so many driveways that they're just blocking, just cutting up all the curb space and eliminating all the on-street parking. So there are options for additional driveways, but only if the lot is wide enough to provide that. And townhouses are a little bit different because the state requirements say that every townhouse lot needs to allow for a single driveway. And we've also added some additional standards to encourage townhouses to be arranged with a shared access or by pairing driveways, but we can't, the city code can't require that. Okay, so to get a little better sense of what that might look like, the 2 townhouses on the far left, those each have, that individual 12-foot driveway. That's what that could look like. And then the 2 in the middle have those 2 12-foot driveways that are paired together. That helps consolidate into one curb cut. So that's an option that we've explicitly encouraged in the code. And then if you have a corner lot or other options, the code also permits and encourages, but does not require a shared access to bring the parking into the rear of the townhouses. That can often use more land and be less feasible to develop. And so that's why the state code and then the city code implementing it doesn't mandate that shared access. And then on a cottage parking, there are at least 2 options that we've provided. The first is shared parking areas that you see in the upper left-hand corner, if it's more of a clustered parking approach. But we've also heard both from builders and from consumers that there's increasing preference for individual parking with cottages. And so in the lower left, you see what a cottage could look like with an individual garage that's fed from that same parking access, either an alley or a driveway, a shared driveway. So both options are available. A few other pieces that we touched on have to do with some special treatment for conversion of existing single-family detached dwellings in the stream corridor overlay. There we're looking to not, put additional people in harm's way, if there could be a flood or something or other hazards there. And so new middle housing types are not permitted there, but if there is an existing single family, it can be internally converted to additional units just to split up the existing space differently. Similarly, we are, encouraging the retention and creative use of existing single-family detached dwellings. Even if they're non-conforming, they can be converted into some of these middle housing types. And we also got to do some fun density math with the density points in the planned unit developments to make sure that middle housing could be incorporated really on equal footing with single family detached. So those are some additional code standards. And then we get into the master plans. So first one there, was the Northwest Newberg plan. So there's 2 things that we did in the package before you to help implement middle housing. The first is amending the specific plan itself with some clarifications about how middle housing is treated. And then the second is amending some code sections that add in some of these same standards about lot sizes and standards compatible with single family detached development. Springbrook Oaks, very similar approach. We needed to amend some portions of the specific plan itself, and then we needed to amend the code. There's some implementing sections in the code for middle housing, and so we aligned that with the changes in the base zones as well. For the airport zone, very unusual code since it requires an airplane hangar on every residential lot. But if someone wanted to allow wanted to build middle housing with their airplane hangar, we did amend the code to permit that. We got some clarification from DLCD that, this was a residential zone and we were required to do that. So So we went ahead and amended the code. We didn't need to amend the plan to do that, however. And then the Springbrook plan, probably one of the areas with the most potential for middle housing and single family development in the future. There are a couple changes that we had the opportunity to make here. And first was amending the plan itself to add those middle housing types, making sure those are permitted in all the residential areas, same as we changed the uses permitted in the residential zones elsewhere in the city. And then really the heart of the changes, we're looking at the dimensional standards for middle housing, those lot sizes, height, and setback. And as we were doing that, in communication with the project representatives, there was also an opportunity to revise some of the standards for single family detached, make the lot sizes a little bit smaller to better respond to the land availability, and make sure that the minimum number of units for this plan area could be delivered through this combination of revised single family detached standards and the new middle housing standards. So ensure that this area efficiently provides residential opportunities that the city meets. Final piece was looking at the Riverfront code amendments, the Riverfront district. And so this was primarily in the code to change some lot sizes and extend some facade design standards. So they'll extend to single family as well as middle housing, treat them the same. And that brings us to the findings and recommendations that I will hand back to Doug to share with you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, is that we had to evaluate the proposal against the statewide planning goals. And so that is included in your packet. We also had to evaluate the proposal against the Newberg comprehensive plan. And there are findings in your packet. And so for both of those, the determination or conclusion by staff is that we are in compliance. We had to look at Division 46, which is the middle housing. And we had to look at it again, as Elizabeth mentioned, when we started this project, we were a medium-sized city, but we are now a large-sized city. Given the US Census population, we are 25,138 individuals now within Newberg. And we did a full evaluation on that and concluded that we were in compliance. And then we had to look at these specific master plan areas. And so that's the Northwest, the Springbrook Oaks, and the Springbrook master plan areas. So there are a set of different procedures. And so we've done an evaluation on all of those and concluded that we are in compliance. Next slide, Elizabeth. So committee commission recommendations. So again, as Elizabeth noted at the beginning, we had a citizens advisory committee for this project. They met 6 times. They reviewed all of the duplex work, which was adopted back in June of 2021. They also looked at all of the middle housing work. And there was a joint work session between the City Council and the Planning Commission back on June 7th, where they got a preview of all of this information. But the ad hoc committee did recommend approval to both the Planning Commission and the City Council for it, but I'm calling the other middle housing, tris, quads, cottage clusters, and townhouses. We also brought the proposal in front of the Affordable Housing Commission, and their recommendation was that council adopt the comprehensive plan amendments, the development code amendments, and amendments to the specific plan areas to incorporate the triplex, quadplex, cottage cluster, and townhouse regulations. Next slide. So staff's recommendation, in short, is to adopt resolution number 2021-371. So I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair. And I should clarify, that's 377. I messed up on the slide. I missed something.
Okay, thank you, Doug. So at this point, let's go ahead and open up the public testimony portion of our hearing. And I'd like to start off with proponents, persons in support of the resolution. Is there anyone in the lobby that would like to speak?
Let's see. We have a Jake, but I'm not sure he's proponent. Let me see.
Okay.
All right, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
This is Jacob Heister. I'm a Newberg citizen living at just off South River and here in Newberg. And I apologize. This is my first time joining you guys on Zoom. And oh, you guys want video? Okay, sure, no problem. There you go. I'm joining on Zoom, and can I just get a sense of how many people we have in the attendees, so I'm aware of number of people and how long to spend?
There's 20 in there right
Okay,
now.
thank you. So this is my first notice in the multifamily dwelling program, and I guess desire to make code changes. I'm not sure if I'm the only one in that condition who's seeing a notice via mail, and that's the first time hearing about it. So again, I apologize if there's a lot of overview that I'm just curious about. But was it Senate Bill 2001 and 25,000 population that triggered this the changes to occur for Newberg to be considered for multifamily dwelling?
So, well, a couple of clarification points. So,
Okay.
the middle housing is not multifamily housing.
All right, modal housing, I apologize.
Yeah, so middle housing. So multifamily housing now is being reclassified as 5 units and above. So we have
Okay.
detached single family, then we have duplexes, triplexes, quads, cottage clusters, and townhouses. So this goes back to HB 2001, when
Yep.
we were a middle or medium-sized city. We were required to comply with the duplex provisions, and we did that work with the committee. Did the survey work, had community open houses, and that proposal went before the Planning Commission and the City Council, and the City Council adopted that ordinance back on June 7th of 2021. And the funding to do that work actually came from the Department of Land Conservation and Development. So we received a grant. And in that grant application that we did, the City Council said, we also want to look at the triplex, quad, cottage cluster, and townhouse development, because we were
Okay.
close to being a large city of 25,000 or more.
Right.
So we did that work. And again, back on June 7th, we went to the Planning Commission City Council with a work session based upon the committee's work, and they received that. We had indicated at that time that we would bring the package for this other middle housing forward for public hearings in the fall of 2021. So here we are in November, and we're in front of the Planning Commission, and this is scheduled to go to the City Council on December 6th. So in the meantime, of course, there was the US Census that came along.
Right.
And the US Census then came out, and the number said we are 25,138 in population. So that actually puts us in the large city category. So there's a little caveat in the administrative rule that Portland State University Population Research Center will have to certify that we are a large city. And those numbers are supposed to come out the end of this particular month. But the council already said we're going to do this other middle housing regulations to address housing affordability within Newberg. And so staff is moving forward with the direction the council had adopted by a resolution back when they applied for the grant to do this work.
So someone asked if I'm a proponent, or I don't know what the opposite word would be, but I don't think I have an official stance, but I feel like it's my due diligence as a citizen to ask a few questions out of curiosity, because with expansion comes some maybe risks and unintended consequences, and that's why I wanted to bring it up. Has this been considered, have unintended consequences of expansion been considered, and some of the risks been highlighted? I'll name a couple just from, I worked as a, in the water, in a water district, sorry, stormwater division in Kirkland, Washington. It was as an intern, but doing that, I realized there's a lot of things that don't always get thought about. That, and also having a lot of exposure to VRDs would be another one. So a lot of these larger family dwellings, things like if in the sense of VRD, vacation rental dwelling, I know that's not part of the scope, but you're sort of welcoming that to be a bigger function of what these units get used for. So the garbage, noise, groundwater, and then I guess the assumption that a single car for a middle housing, I'll try and use that word correctly. Single car for middle housing seems like a risk area as well for I guess, overcrowding and other things that might happen with things being unsafe, I guess, around Newberg. Have those risks been discussed?
So I would respond to that one, Jake, in that we did, as part of this entire process, the administrative rule provided an opportunity to do what's called an infrastructure-based time extension request. IBNR, it's a bad acronym, but it is what it is. So we actually applied and went through that process because we had questions about two areas of Newberg. One would be north of downtown up to the railroad tracks and south of downtown down to the bypass. And did we have adequate infrastructure to accommodate middle housing? We did that analysis. That report was then submitted back to DLCD. They concurred with our analysis, and that analysis said we have sufficient transportation, wastewater, and stormwater to serve additional middle housing.
Okay.
But what we had deficiency in was in our water system, and it was related to fire flow.
Okay.
And in that, it identified that there was about $6.5 million worth of water line improvements that are required south of downtown and then one project north of downtown to be able to accommodate middle housing. So with that time extension request, it gave us some additional time to accommodate those middle housing units in the area south and north of downtown. So our first project is actually underway up north, and then we will be working the other projects for fire flow into our capital improvement program.
I think the devil's in the details, though, on the regulation is really what I'm getting at. Not the whether stormwater is adequate, it's how do you implement, like that one in particular. I can tell you from experience has been so many places of erosion, flooding of a neighboring home, so many things when space planning is not done properly with proper regulation. And I don't even like regulation. I think that there's a misuse of regulation, but I'll say that was more the intent of the question was regulation to ensure that not just from a broad perspective, but from an implementation perspective, just because VRDs, or sorry, middle housing, you may have sufficient space for, if it's not implemented with the correct coding, it's going to all just, it's not going to work out as intended. That's all.
So with that is that the state law and the administrative rule says that we have to allow this housing. So
Okay.
we've followed all of the regulations which are in the proposal. We have separate regulations that deal with issues about groundwater and stormwater. And so in our design and construction standards in the city, there are requirements for impervious surface areas and treatment of those impervious surface areas with rain gardens. As one example, we have a franchise with Waste Management to collect the garbage. And so, on garbage collection day, everybody rolls their carts out basically to the street and they pick them up and they're supposed to roll them back in the evening. The parking space issue, that is one that you brought up, and that again is covered by the administrative rule. We have a cap. There was a lot of discussion with the ad hoc committee about parking, and there were comments by the community through the survey work and the community open houses. Some believe we should require more parking, but the administrative rule puts a cap. We can only require one. DLCD was encouraging not to require any.
Okay, so you have little lenience on the city code side, you have little lenience for that one. I guess maybe a bigger picture would be, the historic character of Newberg is why people moved here, why they're still moving here. There's a lot of history as to why Newberg is the way that it is. Some things are going to change, and that's fine. But I think the desire for people to move here is based off of something that was built that people really appreciate. Is there room in the code or planning to sort of try and maintain that character, and has that been brought up? That was maybe the only other topic, I guess.
Again, I would respond that we've been given them essentially a mandate by the state that we have to comply with these new regulations. And so that's what the city council directed us to do, and that's what we've done.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and Doug, if I could just add one comment, I think in setting the scene for this, we are talking about substantive code changes, but as far as the projections go for what, the total amount of middle housing that we're expecting, Those are actually quite low. A lot of the economic modeling across the state shows that they're expecting about a 3% growth in middle housing as a result of this, just based on
Okay.
the land economics and consumer preferences and what's available. And so, certainly it seems like a lot of change up front, but I would say there aren't quadplex ferries that are running around that are turning,
No, I know.
every other lot.
I happen to live right next to a lot that was just taken down, an 1890 home. And
Yes.
there is intention for them to put in a middle housing of some kind. So I think that there's obviously preference on my end for some things, but I think generally speaking, I also have seen enough to know the ways that it gets misdone. And that's why I'm,
Yeah.
so.
So playing off of Elizabeth, if I may, Mr. Chair, is that we also ran the numbers about the middle housing based upon the 3%. And for Newberg, over the course of the next 20 years, based upon our residential development projections, which are in our housing needs analysis, we're talking about 57 to 58 units of middle housing over the course of the next 20 years.
Wow. Okay.
Out of about 3,300 residential units. So it's a very small percentage. And again, it's the market has to decide if they're going to build it. We're not saying you have to do this. We have to provide the options or opportunities for it to occur.
I just want to say thank you all for your effort put on this. I know that you guys are, public servants for the city, and I appreciate that. And thank you for answering my questions. That's all I had. Thank you very much.
And thank you. And this is Chairman Musil again. And if I could just follow up on what Doug was saying too, that it is a statewide mandate, but that's actually, I look at that as a positive because it levels the playing field. Every city has to comply. So it's not like there's one city that's saying, hey, you're going to get all the triplexes, or anything like that.
Right.
So it levels it out, and that will decrease the numbers overall because it's spread over more areas and things like that. So, and like you said, it does look like a lot of changes up front, but as long as we play smart and we look at the infrastructure ahead of time, like they were doing with the water there and everything, we should be okay.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Okay, who's up next for a comment? Would it be easier if we just had everyone raise their hands when they were ready and then you went through the list?
Yeah, there's quite a few people, so you just have to give me a second to look through them all. See,
Okay.
some of them, yeah, okay. I did promote Mr. Talt, and he wanted to use his video, so I'm gonna make that possible for him.
Wow, there I am.
There you are.
All right, thank you. So thanks for having me back again. And as I said before, I'd appreciate it if my bullet point is recorded in your minutes. I did have one question, and then I'll give you my last final bullet point. I'm on a pretty steep learning curve here. I probably perused 400 pages of your documentation starting at about 8 o'clock this morning. My eyes are rolling in my head. Do I recall someplace in there, and maybe this is for you, Elizabeth, do I recall someplace in there that the HB 2001 applies to new urban growth plans that are implemented after January of this year? So in other words, if you have an existing growth plan that was done, say, last year, you don't have to yet comply with HB 2001. Do I have that right or anything like that? I mean, it was 400 pages ago, so if I got it wrong.
I think, Jim, there is a provision, if we were going to do a new master plan area, there is a January of 2021 provision in that. But we're not proposing any new master plan areas. We have 3 existing, we have our Northwest, our Springbrook Oaks, and our Springbrook master plan areas. And those have already been adopted and on the books. And as Elizabeth noted, is that we're making some modifications in order to comply with HB 2001.
Okay, Thank you for that. I knew I'd seen that someplace, but I couldn't quite remember the details. Yeah, I've got to say, to be honest, I'm not entirely pleased with the way this is going, but I do understand that it's coming from Salem, and you know, you can't fight that. And also, I appreciate Jeffrey's comment that yes, indeed, it's going to have some impact on the community, but probably not enough to change the nature of our community, at least not in the short term. So I appreciate that. So my one bullet point, whether it's reasonable or not, is that you please change your urban growth plan recommendation to the city council to the recommendation that the plan be put to a public vote during a normal election cycle. And that would be my only request. Whether it's practical or not, that's still my request. I think that I guarantee you that a lot of the citizenry would appreciate that. And also, I think a lot of the citizenry are unfortunately not informed about what's going on. I know that you had some committees, and I know that you had some surveys, and those were good efforts. And still, for whatever the reason, I bet you that 90% of Newbergians have no clue about this urban growth plan. And I think we need more time and more discussion on it. I'm sorry that we're slow to get off our couches and get to the screen here, but it's just the way it is. So anyway, thank you for listening to me, and please consider my bullet points.
Well, thank you, sir. And if we could go ahead and move on for our next comment.
We have a Justin that should be joining us here pretty soon. And there we
Hello, is
go.
it my turn?
It is.
Thank you. Sorry, in the flipping of the screens here, my audio is muted. My name is Justin Morris. I'm a citizen here too, here in Newberg. I've been here just about 20 years. I don't have a lot to say, or maybe I do have a lot to say, but at this moment, just like our last citizen, this is really the first I'm hearing about this. And we do get letters in the mail, and we try to follow up as much as we can. But anyways, I think more communication is always better, and having as many people in the public aware of what's going on and the opportunity to vote on what we're doing, I think is a good thing. My first concern would be just what kind of traffic considerations have we considered? As far back as I can remember, Newberg has never had a good traffic situation here, at least in the last 20 or 30 years. Each year it gets worse. 99 is a parking lot on the weekends. I think if we offer more condensed housing or middle housing, however we want to call it, I don't think that's going to help our traffic issues. My second note to that would be we seem to fail to maintain the roads that we have currently, especially in our older neighborhoods. And how are we going to take care of the roads with greater traffic if we can't take care of them now? That's all. And thank you for the time for me to make my request.
Well, we thank you. All right. And if we could move on for the next person, please.
Anyone in the attendee room, if you'd like to speak, please raise your virtual hand, or you can also send me a note through chat if you like. I'm not seeing any other hands, Chairman.
Okay, well, thank you. So I'll go ahead and I'll ask staff if you need to do a summary of any written testimony.
There was 2 additional pieces that came out, Mr. Chair, as a supplemental to your packet. One of those was a communication from Kurt Smith, representing Hazel and Betty Ford, and he was inquiring about what this proposal meant for their particular facility. And in the proposal, I shared with him in the proposal, in the institutional zone, it would allow cottage cluster development. It already allows single family, duplex, triplex, quadplex development. The other communication we received as a supplemental was from the Fair Housing Council of Oregon, which gave us a gold star in their email, in the labeling of their email, for the work that was done to comply with the House Bill 2001 provisions for middle housing. Those were the supplemental pieces that came in that were distributed yesterday as late in your packet. I would go back to the staff recommendation, which would be to adopt resolution 2021-377.
Mr. Chairman, I have a Chandler Shore that is raising his hand. I don't know if maybe he had difficulty. Would you allow more?
Yeah, absolutely. With Zoom, who
Okay.
knows? Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Quick question, and please forgive me if you guys already addressed this or I'm just not following along. But off of the Foothills Drive in that neighborhood, is that area already, is it more of like a, is it set to be developed, or is it more just being coded and zoned out for development for approval? What's the status on that? Is there a set plan on how to go about building that neighborhood out, or right now we're just in the pre-talks about it?
So, Chandler, are you talking about Foothills west of College Street or east of College Street?
East of College Street, sorry.
Okay, east of College Street. So the Foothills area east of College Street is part of the Northwest Specific Plan. And so in this packet that the Planning Commission is reviewing, that there are some modifications to that specific plan area to accommodate middle housing. Most of the Northwest Specific Plan area is developed out. There is a parcel up at the very northeast corner of that plan area that connects over towards Aspen Way that is not developed yet. And then there are a couple of infill properties south of Foothills. There's essentially one larger parcel that has an older home on it that has not been developed or had additional housing. But most of the Northwest Specific Plan is already filled out.
Wonderful, thank you.
Chair, this is Bobby. Could I get Chandler's last name for the record?
It was Sure, Bobby, S-C-H-U-R.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Yes.
Justin said he forgot one question and would like to be able to ask that.
I'll allow it, Justin. Go ahead.
Hey, when this switched over, I did not hear your answer. Do I have time to ask another question?
Yes, go ahead, Justin.
Thank you, sir, very much. And I apologize for forgetting. I just had one last question, and I didn't see this in the mailing, but I've read in some other articles that this might be a potential, but will car camping be allowed, encouraged, or lawful or permitted under this new comprehensive plan?
Justin, no, that is not part of this proposal. The city council has accepted a 5-year housing work program. And one of the work elements that we will be looking at this particular fiscal year, which started on July 1st, was the issue of car camping and RVs, but it is not part of this proposal. It'll be something separate that staff will evaluate and bring forward to the Planning Commission and the City Council.
Thank you very much for your reply.
And thank you. So I'll go ahead and one more time. Did you have anything to add, Doug?
No, Mr. Chair, I don't, other than just restating that the staff recommendation is to adopt resolution 2021-377.
Thank you. So this time, let's go ahead and close the public testimony portion and open up for deliberation by commissioners. And I'll go ahead and start off if I could, and just say that it's understandable, you know, a lot of the concerns and everything, but if we consider some of the bigger picture on parking and traffic and separate that issue from the housing and understand that the traffic issues are coming anyway. And most of the traffic growth is likely to be from single family housing and everything and from other cities. So hopefully now that, you know, there's a new infrastructure plan out there and everything, maybe we can get some dollars for improvement. But overall, the middle housing is just one part of a plan to help it try to allow for more affordable housing, and isn't going to be a huge traffic boogeyman, I don't think. But I'll stop there and open up to other commissioners if you'd like to speak.
Planning Commissioner Wright, I have a question
Go ahead.
for Doug. In one of the submissions received from one of the building officials, they said or commented that the addition of these don't align with the building code, specifically 1 to 2 Oregon Family Dwelling Code and 3 or more units, Oregon Structural Specialty Code. Can you elaborate on that? Because I looked up some of the Oregon Specialty Code to do with ORS 455.610. New codes went into effect April 1st. Chapter 1 was immediate, and all the other chapters were a phase-in, but didn't seem to touch on that. It's a huge codes page, so do you know any specifics that they were talking about?
The building official and I just discussed this. And so under the building code, single family and duplex are considered single family. So when you get to the issue of triplex, quadplex development, it's a different set of building code regulations. And I had to explain to him that, yes, I understand that, but the land use portion says that we will allow these types of units, that multifamily will be considered 5 units and above, and that he would need to follow the requirements of the Oregon Structural Specialty Code in the development of triplexes and quadplexes. There still may be some issues that the Building Codes Division needs to address regarding building codes for middle housing. I know part of the work that DLCD was doing was having conversations with the Building Codes Divisions about what modifications they need to do to their regulations. And there may be additional modifications that the Building Code Division has to do to their standards and regulations in order to address and comply with the middle housing provisions.
That's what I was wondering. All right, thank you, Doug, very much. No further questions?
Could I just add one other clarification, is that that's another reason why the proposal is to allow detached triplexes and quadplexes, because if they were 3 or 4 small individual detached units, those could still, as I understand, go under the single family code rather than triggering the specialty code. So the way that the definitions in the code are drafted, it works within the building code that we have, unless and until the state changes that distinction.
Wonderful, thank you.
This is Commissioner Capri. I would like to just maybe make a comment or question whether I'm back to the parking and the traffic. When all of the development neighborhoods are conceptualized, is there an overlayment of how that traffic's going to move? And parking, you may only have one parking spot for each house, but you know that most houses are going to have 2 cars. So I just still get stuck on that. I love Newberg, and I don't want to see it turn into some of the bad situations that I've seen. So I guess that's all I'm asking.
So Commissioner, the city has a transportation system plan with a hierarchy of roadway systems. And so we have major collectors on those, back up. We have major arterials, minor arterials, major collectors, minor collectors, local roadways, and then we have limited residential streets, which are narrower streets. So as part of the administrative rule, it does not require that you have to go through a transportation planning rule analysis to implement the provisions of House Bill 2001. So if you step back a little bit more, and if you go with 3% of the housing units that will occur over the course of the next 20 years, we're talking around roughly 57 to 58 units. So each residence generates roughly a little less than 10 trips a day. So over 3,300 of our units are going to be predicted to be detached single family homes. So the majority of our traffic is going to come from the development pattern of single family homes. So our transportation system is modeled such that we are anticipating the type of development pre the middle housing. And so that's why we have this whole hierarchy of roadway systems. The impact of having 57 to 58 additional residential units in the city is pretty minor in the overall trip generation that will be created. I think everyone needs, from the commission side, needs to understand that it's not 1960 anymore. Is that the community will continue to grow.
Yeah.
And there will be additional traffic. There will be additional roadways that will be constructed. And they could range from arterials to collectors to local residential streets. Other communities within Yamhill County will continue to grow. Communities along the coast will continue to grow. So part of the community's efforts for 30 plus years was to develop the bypass, to take that traffic that is passing through Newberg, but not stopping in Newberg, and moving it onto the bypass. And so phase 1 of the bypass has been constructed. Phase 2A of the bypass is now in design, and that's the interchange at Highway 219 and the bypass. There's a phase 2B that would go from there. It would take a new roadway that would go up and connect at Highway 99 up near Rex Hill. There's a future phase 3, which is in the Dundee to Dayton area. So there are a variety of plans and activities that are occurring within Yamhill County that are addressed by the Parkway Committee for additional highways or completion of highways, Salmon River Highway, Highway 18, in order to address that pass-through traffic. So there's additional capacity on the local roadways and the state highway system that exists within Newberg. Remember is that we have 4 state highways in Newberg: 99, 219, 240, and Highway 18.
Thank you, Doug.
And your question about parking, and I know, Commissioner, that has been a passion of yours in many conversations.
Yes.
But again, the administrative rule puts a cap. And so that's 1 space per unit. So we did work with our engineering department and our consultants. So Brett Music is with us this evening, and looking at that driveway spacing. So when Elizabeth was talking about that with shared driveways and spacings of 22 feet between driveways, is to try to address the issue about having parking space capability within the public roadway if a unit has two cars. Now, if a unit is constructed, it's not required that they have to have a garage. That will, again, will be up to the developer if they choose to construct a garage. But if you have a garage and then you have the driveway that gets to the garage, you've got space for 2 cars. But as this commission has talked about, people fill up their garage with stuff. And then they park in front of the garage.
Yes.
And if you have 2 cars, then it's parking in the public street. And so as I've shared with the commission before, is that public rights of way is to be used and can be used by the public at large. And they can park. Different roadways have different classifications. There is no on-street parking on major arterials, minor arterials, and major collectors. So again, when we will have to work with developers, if they're proposing a particular project, and it happens to be on one of those higher classification roadways, is how will parking work? The developer will also need to look at that from a marketing perspective, be it a for sale unit or a rental unit. You know, is there adequate parking in order to be able to sell that particular product to an end user or not? So in this entire plethora of 43 changes in the development code, we're providing the flexibility, but staff now and in the future will have to work with each developer to make sure that they're complying with the new regulations that are proposed, if they're adopted, and that developer will need to look at the marketability of the product that they're proposing to construct.
Thank you so much, Doug.
And I thank you. And any other commissioners have comments, questions, concerns?
Doug, I have one more question I wanted to ask, if you know it. Commissioner Wright, do you know how many cars or trucks, vehicles using the overpass at this time per day or weekly?
Commissioner, I do not have that number.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, moving on, let's go ahead and move to action by the commission. Would anyone like to move forward with a motion?
Commissioner Capri, I'd like to move to adopt the resolution 2021-377.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Let's go ahead and move on to a roll call vote, please.
Okay, Jason Dale,
Yes.
Chris Wright,
Yes.
Sharon Capri,
Yes.
Jeffrey Musall.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, the motion carries. Thank you. So moving on, our next course of action is a quasi judicial public hearing. And I'd like to go ahead at this time, open this hearing, and we'll be considering the annexation of 187.76 acres of 10 parcels and adjacent right-of-way and Newberg Dundee bypass into the Newberg city limits. So I'll go ahead and outline the same procedure for testimony. We'd like to limit to 5 minutes a person and go with proponents first when we do that. And go ahead and now call for any abstentions or bias, ex parte contact, or objections to jurisdiction that might be. Okay, hearing none, let's move on. And Doug, are you doing the reading, or is there a new person?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to take care of this evening. Aiden and I have not had a chance to meet yet.
Oh, okay. Aiden, I'm sorry, I called you our new person, Aiden. My apologies, but okay, Doug, take it away.
So I'm hoping that we will get to that by the time we get to our December meeting.
Yeah.
So ORS 197-763 requires certain statements be made at the commencement of a public hearing. I need new glasses, or I need better light. The applicable city and state zoning criteria must be listed. This means that we must advise you of the standards that must be satisfied by the applicant prior to our approval of an application. The planning staff will list the applicable criteria during this during his or her presentation of the staff report. Persons wishing to participate in this hearing must direct their testimony or evidence towards the criteria stated by the planner or other specific city or state criteria which you believe apply. You must tell us why the testimony or evidence relates to the criteria. Any issue which might be raised in an appeal of this case to the Land Use Board of Appeals, LUBA, must be raised in person or by letter at the local level prior to the city approving or denying the application. The law states that the issue must be raised in enough detail to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond. This part of the law is also known as the raise it or waive it requirement. If you do not bring it up now, you cannot bring it up at LUBA. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval in enough detail to allow the local government or its designee to respond to this issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Prior to the conclusion of the initial evidentiary hearing on an application, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional evidence or testimony regarding the application. The Planning Commission will grant such a request through a continuance or extension of the record. So that is the legal reading, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you. So we'd like to go ahead and move on to the staff report.
Okay. Robin, if you'd like to pull up the PowerPoint, please. So, Mr. Chair, again, Doug Rux, Community Development Director. This is an Annexation 21-0003, which is an annexation of land for ODOT and Newberg, Oregon LLC, the current owner of the former mill site. Next slide. So this annexation is a little over 187 acres. As the chair had mentioned, it's 10 parcels and adjacent rights of way, and the portions of the Newberg-Dundee bypass into the city limits. And so the bypass, in this case, runs from Chehalem Creek back east to about Wilsonville Road. And there are portions of that particular bypass that are currently not within the city limits. The mill site proper is at 1301 Winooski Road, but it's made up of many parcels, both east and west of South River Street. Section C in your staff report lists all of the associated tax lots that are included in this proposed annexation. So those are individual private owned parcels, but then in the ODOT bypass area, there's also parcel designations by information that we received from Yamhill County. Next slide. So the comprehensive plan designations for the area that is proposed to be annexed are medium density residential, Riverfront District, high density residential, Riverfront District, commercial Riverfront District, industrial Riverfront District, mix Riverfront District, and then there are additional areas that are designated as industrial, commercial, and medium density residential. The details of that are listed out in your staff report under section C and attachment 2. Next slide. So this is a graphic of the area to be annexed. And so it's all the lands that are within the purple boundaries. So if you start at the left, the rail line south of 9th Street, then it goes over and picks up land that's part of the bypass. The mill site proper, some additional bypass to the north of the mill site, and then to the east of the mill site is the bypass area as it extends over to Highway 219. And then there are lands that ODOT has acquired as part of the interchange and future extension of the bypass to the east of Highway 219. On this graphic, we noted that the mill site is owned by CDC. That's the parent company of Newberg, Oregon LLC. Next slide. I went through the comp plan designation. So this is a graphic representation. So you can see the areas that are in yellow are the residential areas in that medium density, and there's high density. The blue is the industrial areas, and both within the Riverfront District and outside of the Riverfront District. There's some commercial over off Highway 219. And then the mix RD is down on the mill site proper, and it's the area just to the east of South River Street. Next slide. This is the proposed zoning that correlates with the comprehensive plan designations. So where areas are identified as MDR, that relates to an R2 designation. And if it's in the riverfront, it has the overlay designation of RD. A little bit of R3 up along the railroad line. The mix is an ME. T4, that's just to the west of South River Street. The mill site proper is predominantly, it's an M2 RD, which is a light industrial riverfront district. A little bit of M3 down along Winooski Street. And then M2 from the mill site extending over to Highway 219, and then some R2 and C2 areas that are over at the future interchange of the bypass on Highway 219. Next slide. This is a very complicated map, but what it's representing is there's lots of infrastructure in and around the area that's proposed to be annexed. The bypass has its own storm drainage system, which is identified. The mill site proper itself, it has a main water line that runs north-south from our water treatment plant through the site. There's wastewater to the east and to the west of the main mill site proper, and some storm water. So the conclusion from that is that all of the areas that propose to be annexed that can be developed for industrial or residential development has access to extend public infrastructure to serve those particular properties. Next slide. There are criteria 15.250020 for annexations. It must be located within the urban growth boundary. The area to be annexed is within the UGB. It must be contiguous. And in this particular situation, it's contiguous to basically the north, south, east, and west for the areas to be annexed. Next slide. The additional criteria under 15.250030 complies with the comprehensive plan designations. And so I've already walked through that. We have those comp plan designations, and then there's the corollary zoning classifications that go with those comp plan designations that are noted in your PowerPoint slide and in your staff report. Next slide. 15.250030 continued, B1 and 2, adequate level of urban services. And so I showed you the graphic on where the public infrastructure was located. So there is sewer and water and roads available to serve the private development portion of it. The bypass is its own separate element because it is a state highway. We also looked at police, fire, parks, and schools. And so water is available, sanitary sewer is available. Next slide. Transportation is available. Again, Winooski Road, South River, Northeast 14th, South College, Northeast Dog Ridge Road to serve the area as it develops in the future. And for police, fire, and parks, all of those elements are available. The police department is about 1.1 mile away, so is the fire department. There are parks in the area that's or adjacent to the area to be annexed. Levitt Park off of 11th Street, Ewing Young Park down off south of 9th Street and to the west of the railroad tracks. Next slide. So staff's recommendation is to adopt resolution 2021-376. I will say that Dan Fricke from the Oregon Department of Transportation is with us this evening in case you have any questions from him. I did have a conversation with Newberg, Oregon LLC, otherwise known as CDC, late this afternoon, and they were not able to attend this evening as the representative is traveling because his son is getting married. So he had a personal family conflict, and I can fully understand that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Doug. As far as testimony, is there anyone that's a principal proponent? Or not really in this case, right?
Well, we do. So this proposal was brought forward by an application by the Oregon Department of Transportation. So Dan Fricke, my colleague there, has worked diligent with me over these months to put this application together to annex the portions of the bypass that are currently not within the city limits. And then, as I mentioned, Newberg, Oregon LLC was not able to join us this evening because of some personal family issues. So Dan, anything you might want to say? Your audio's off, Dan.
There we go. I think I'm not muted anymore. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, again, for the record, Dan Fricke, I'm a senior planner with the Oregon Department of Transportation Region 2 office in Salem. Basically working with Doug and the city to fulfill an agreement we had with the city to work to develop this annexation after phase 1 of the bypass is completed. I have nothing to add to Doug's presentation. Obviously, as an applicant, we concur with the staff recommendation, and if I can, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Well, thank you, sir. Do any commissioners have any questions? Okay, we'd move on. Is there anyone else in the room that would like to speak?
We have, Mark Kramer has a question. He said, my one question is in regards to the procedure being used. I remember voting on annexation measures in the past. Is that no longer the case?
That is no longer the case. State law changed. So if a property owner applies to a city and requests annexation, it does not require voter approval. If an annexation is initiated by the city, i.e. the city council, then that annexation would require going to a vote of the people of Newberg.
Well, thank you. And thanks for the question, Mark. And moving on, are there anyone else in the room with questions?
Not seeing any.
Okay, not seeing any other. Let's go ahead and ask for a staff summary.
Mr. Chair, so staff's recommendation is to adopt resolution number 2021-376.
Thank you, Doug. And also I want to close the public testimony portion and move on to deliberation from commissioners. Any commissioners have questions or comments?
Commissioner Wright. I noticed there was a comment from the police that they were concerned about the reduction in a general fund money for public safety due to this annexation. And I was wondering, since the garbage and recycling 80 cents increase per customer, receiving additional revenues to the city of $212,646 into the city's general fund for 2022. Does some of that go towards public safety, and if so, how much?
I don't have the details, Commissioner, on that, but yes, I am aware of the chief's comment. By annexing property into the city limit, it actually generates additional property tax revenue into the general fund. It's not a reduction. The county assessor has to establish what those values are. For the garbage rates, it's a franchise, and the franchise collections from not only waste management, but other utilities, those dollars go into the general fund. Through the annual budget process, the various departments that are funded out of the general fund, our budget committee determines what that funding amount will be. So annexation, I think, really stepping back, annexation does not reduce funding. Annexation actually increases the funding revenue that comes into the general fund for the city. Now, there is a caveat to that. If property that is annexed is tax exempt, so like in this case, ODOT does not pay property taxes to the city for the bypass. The mill site, as it redevelops, well, as annexation, they would pay the additional city rate, millage rate, for that property that is annexed.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that that department knew that with this annexation that there would be more in the general fund, just arbitrarily from that as well. Thank you, Doug. I appreciate that comment.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I just have one comment. I think this is one of the steps necessary to implement the Riverfront master plan that's been in the works for so long, and I can't see anything wrong with or can't see any issues that have been introduced at this particular meeting. And we've been looking at the issues and concerns surrounding that particular project for 2, 3, 4 years now. And I think this is a good next step.
Indeed, I would agree. Anyone else have any comments? Okay, let's move on to Planning Commission action. Can we get a proposal on the what we have?
Planning Commissioner Wright, I move to adopt Planning Commission Resolution 2021-376, recommending City Council approve the annexation of exactly 187.76 acres of properties plus the area of the area of the adjacent rights of way into the city of Newberg, and change the zoning from Yamhill County to Newberg, the city of Newberg zoning. I already said that. Including attachments, Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C, additional attachments 1 through 6, sub exhibits A through H.
I second
Did
the
I get all
motion.
that?
I'm not repeating that, but I'll second the motion.
Thank you very much. We have a motion and a second. Can we get the roll call vote, please?
Okay, Jason Dale,
Yes.
Chris Wright,
Yes.
Sharon Capri,
Yes.
Jeffrey Musall.
Yes. And the motion carries.
Thank you all. Thank you, Dan.
Okay, so moving on, it looks like our next order of business is upcoming.
Yeah, so the upcoming agenda. At this particular juncture on your December meeting, I only have one item to bring up, and that's just kind of give you a summary on an application that the city and the county have received regarding an urban reserve expansion. I brought this up before. This is not an action that will come before the Planning Commission. It goes to the Newberg Urban Area Management Commission for their review and recommendation to the City Council and to the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners. That's the only item I have coming up for December. January, just as a reminder, there will be the election of a new chair and a vice chair. Commissioner Sherry did step down at the last meeting, and so there will be a recruitment process and appointment for a replacement for him. So I've talked with the city recorder about that. We may have a couple of other cases based upon some pre-application meetings that we've been holding. So we may have a couple other items that might also be on your January agenda.
Well, thank you, Doug. At this point, it sounds like we're pretty much ready to wrap up. After we close, if I could just take a moment with, if I could ask Commissioner Wright and Doug to give me just a moment after we close. But at this time, let's go ahead and close the November 10th, 2021 meeting of the Newberg Planning Commission. Thank you very much.